Jason Todd is the name of the second Robin, and the boy wonder who Batman calls his greatest failure. Jason grew up in a less than stable household. His father was a crook in Gotham who would take jobs from villains like the Penguin or Mr. Freeze, and his mother was a drug addict. Eventually, his father's luck ran out, and he got thrown in prison where he died. Although Jason still had his mother, it wasn't for long, as she died of a drug overdose shortly after. And following his mother's death, Jason turned to a life of crime to survive on the streets of Gotham. He would steal and pawn just to make a quick buck off of the street, and one day he met Bruce. Batman came back to the Batmobile and saw Jason successfully stealing the tires off of it. Instead of getting mad at the boy or scolding him, he smiled. Bruce was impressed that someone would be able to steal the tires off his car, let alone a kid. At the time, Batman was partnerless, as Dick had quit being Robin and left on bad terms with him. So, naturally, he leapt at the chance to gain another ally in his war on crime. He saw untapped potential inside the boy and inducted him into the role of Robin after just 6 harsh months of training. When Jason first started wearing the costume, he treated it as a game. He would make fun of his enemies and have a blast parading around the streets of Gotham. But as he grew older, his personality changed. He became angrier with each passing year, and it got to the point where he would inflict unneeded injury on his enemies. Bruce tried to scold him, but it was too late for the boy. There was already a darkness forming within him. Tragedy struck when Jason had picked up on a lead that his mother was in fact alive and living in another country. The young boy went, and although he succeeded in finding his mother, he also encountered something far worse. The Joker had set Jason up and ended up torturing the boy. Batman had no idea that Jason had left, and when he found out, he was too late. Bruce arrived just as the building Jason was being held hostage in exploded. Bruce was devastated. He had filled this kid that he had filled with so much hope, so much potential, and for the first time ever, Bruce had let his partner die in the field, and he was helpless to do anything about it. Jason came back from the dead years later due to a woman named Talia dumping him into a pit that has the power to resurrect people. But instead of joining the good fight as Bruce's soldier once more, he did the opposite. After losing his memories due to the side effects of the resurrection, he finally got his bearings straight. But there was something that bothered Jason when he was catching up with all that happened since his death. The Joker was still alive. This filled the boy with so much rage and gave him a purpose again. His new purpose was to show Bruce that his way of doing things just wasn't as effective as killing the criminals. He went about this by readapting the Joker's old persona of the Red Hood and striking true fear into criminals. With his new brand of justice, there would be no second chances. If the Red Hood deemed you unworthy or labeled you scum, then you would die. Although he had planned this for a long time, it didn't go exactly the way Jason thought it would, and it led to a final confrontation with Bruce. As Jason was holding the Joker with a gun to his head, he gave Bruce a choice. Either stop him from killing the Joker by shooting him in the face, or let him finish what Bruce should have done long ago. This interaction between the two is really important because Jason wasn't angry with Bruce. He was angry with his inability to kill the Joker, and couldn't understand how he could let a madman repeatedly hurt so many people in his life. Bruce answers the boy's rage by saying something intriguing. He said that it would be too damned easy, and if he crossed that line, he would never come back. This confuses Jason because he didn't want Batman to kill every criminal out there. He just wanted him to kill the Joker because he took Jason away from him. Although Bruce said that he could never come back from the darkness if he ever decided to kill the Joker, I believe that there is something more behind that statement. Even if he had killed the Joker prior to Jason's resurrection, it wouldn't have brought the boy back from the dead. All he would have done is just taken a man's life, and nothing would have been gained. But now since Jason is back, everything has changed. He has the chance to rehabilitate him and put him on the path of good again. He tries to show Jason the hope that he once instilled in him at such a young age, but after being killed, Jason doesn't have any trace of Bruce's so-called hope. Jason's capacity for hope died when he was being tortured in that warehouse, when he was getting beat to death and was laying next to a bomb. In those final moments, he had hope that some way, somehow, Bruce would come to save him, because that's what Batman does. He always swoops in at the last second and saves the day. But that time, he didn't. Bruce was unable to save the boy, and now that same boy was standing right in front of him. This confrontation ends with Bruce ricocheting a batarang off of the wall behind Jason and disorienting him long enough for him to drop the weapon and the Joker. The building collapses on the three due to the explosive charges set earlier, and when the dust settled, Jason was nowhere to be found. Bruce had failed him twice. He had failed to set him on the straight and narrow that he had laid for the boy all those years ago. Although he had reached his hand out for Jason to grab, he chose not to grab it. Instead, he chose to go against the ideas that Bruce ingrained in him at such a young age. Bruce's original intention behind inducting Jason as Robin was to keep him off the streets and to prevent a criminal in the making. But by doing so, the opposite result occurred. He had failed what he set out to do in the first place. As the years went by, Jason began to appear in more and more issues to give troubles to the whole Bat family. Oftentimes, he would butt heads with Batman over his ideals and would be ostracized because of them. But Jason is a good kid, don't get me wrong. He doesn't kill people for the thrill of it. He kills criminals because he thinks it's the most effective way to combat crime. Deep down inside, he is still fighting the good fight and adhering to Batman's crusade. He is just unfortunately misguided because of his death and the trauma that came from that night. It is still a major part of who he is. That's why Jason Todd is such a compelling character to read about. At the end of the day, he is going through a redemption story. It's a story of a hero that died and reached rock bottom, only to slowly climb his way out of the hole and back into the light. Jason Todd was the boy who died, and although it was very tragic, it also showed everyone that comics can get dark and brutal. It didn't have to be these wacky stories with no consequences, but instead comics could be more serious and tackle themes that TV at the time were afraid to. Jason opened up so many doors for future writers, and that is why I appreciate what he had to go through. Backtracking a bit, but the real reason why Jason Todd had died is because he was poorly received by everyone who was reading Batman comics at the time. When he was first introduced, DC pretty much made him a carbon copy of Dick Grayson, so naturally readers hated him. He had nothing original about him, and there was nothing that made him stand out from Dick's shadow. Since Jason was so poorly received, DC decided to make a call-in poll where they got to decide if he lived or died. Obviously, a majority would call in for him to be killed, and now here we are, 33 years after that event. Jason has now become a mainstay character in the DC universe, and he is wildly popular. He has had 2 comic runs since 2011 and remains a relevant character in people's minds and hearts. I think that his death has been one of the most impactful events in comic book history, at least in the DC universe. It has spawned so many interesting storylines and even animated movies. I recommend anyone who's interested in the character to check out the movie Batman Under the Red Hood. This was a super popular film, and I loved it when it came out back in 2010. It's actually what introduced me to the character and made me follow his journey in the comics. I do want to say that the film is a great watch, even if you don't know much about Batman or his villains. And hey, maybe after watching it, you'll be as interested in DC as I was. Thanks again to the people who watched the video, and I'll see you in the next one.